Hi guys, how's it going? Welcome to another episode of Gardening for Life channel. In this channel we try to simplify some of the practices around gardening and really living a sustainable life around even the smallest plot of land you can find or containers that you can use for gardening as much as you can. So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite vegetables that we absolutely love growing. It comes with a lot of challenges but also a lot of rewards, and it does have the highest number of strategies when it comes to how you grow it and prune it and upkeep it for highest production as well. So the vegetable I'm talking about is tomatoes. So let's get going, guys. So let's talk about the anatomy of a tomato plant. What you essentially have is you have the main branch that goes all the way up. It's also called the leader, and within that you also have the sunleaf, which are essentially the leaves that produce all the energy in the plant for it to survive. And then you see the buds themselves on the top, which will essentially become the flower and the fruit themselves. So this is a good example of a plant where we have the main branch again, and then you have some of the buds coming up, and you have a sucker. So in our garden, what we also try to do is we grow several different varieties of tomatoes. As I mentioned before, we have the determinate and the indeterminate type of tomatoes growing here. The one that we are using for doing the cleanup around the suckers is a determinate type of tomato. However, we also have the indeterminate type of tomato that's growing here, and you can see the difference quite quickly. It's already quite tall. It's almost 5 feet tall, and we have to actually set this up on a trellis to really get it to grow well. Now the difference is, as the name suggests, for the determinate and indeterminate. So for this determinate type of tomato, what that essentially means is it's going to grow about 4 to 5 feet in height. And what you will see is at the end of it you will have a terminal bud, and that could look like something like this. You have a terminal flower bud, and it will not grow beyond that. So the second quality of a determinate tomato plant, apart from the height itself, is the fact that all the fruits will be maturing at the same exact time, within weeks of each other. So that's an excellent variety to really harvest and to grow for farmers and for gardeners who have a very short season for growing. So for instance, if you have a very long winter and you have a short summer, or you have only 3-4 months of summer, then determinate type of tomato would be more ideal compared to indeterminate quality. The other reason we go a lot of determinate quality of tomato plants is the fact that it's quite compact. For the indeterminate type of a tomato that you see here climbing up, what I would really warn the gardeners about is the fact that it can grow extremely tall. We have grown some of the indeterminate tomatoes that have gone up to 10 to 12 feet. You have to be an expert in trelling as well to make sure that it doesn't catch any of the diseases and it doesn't loop over and break at the top, which can really lead to the death of the plant itself. So it's quite key that you are expert in trelling this as well. We're going to be putting this against a trellis, and it's going to grow at least 10 to 12 feet. You're living in a zone where you do have winters and the tomato plant cannot survive those, then it would be better to go for the determinate kind of tomato. The indeterminate might not survive through that winter. The only two ways that really these indeterminates die, and one of the reasons that ours also died was because of the fact of very dry weather. We had a spill of drought here in Kenya last year, and it really killed it off. We had a very nice 12 feet tomato plant growing. It died off from such a long drought season that we had, and the heat was just too much. The other reason is if you break off the top. So if you want to have a certain height for this particular plant, what you do is really you cut off the top of it at the terminal bud. So a sucker is essentially a mini plant that grows at a 45-degree angle from the main branch and the sun leaves that come out. And these are easy to identify. They are somewhat like, if you think about from an armpit of a tomato, you have another arm growing. So the reason we want to trim out these suckers is because they take quite a lot of energy, and most of the energy of the tomato will be growing for survival of these suckers. So one of the reasons is, of course, if we want the tomatoes to grow well and for the flowers to come up, we should get rid of these suckers so the energy can be focused on the fruiting itself. And the other reason we want to get rid of these suckers is because they would also bunch up and they would create quite a lot of crowding of leaves themselves, which is quite detrimental for the tomato plant, because that means there would be a higher chance of diseases, and also there would be less of an airflow and also sunlight. We want to make sure that the tomato plant is nice and open, like you can see here, so that there's plenty of airflow, sunlight flow, and also to ensure that the flowers are not hidden by too many leaves, so that it creates higher chance of pollination as well by the nice bees themselves. So now we're going to try to get rid of this sucker, and there are a few ways to do this. One way is to use a clipper, and this clipper, you want to make sure that you have cleaned it thoroughly with alcohol, and that's to really avoid any cross-plantation movement of diseases, fungal diseases that can go from one plant to another from the razor. So you want to clean it nicely, and simply you want to remove the sucker using the razor. What we want to make sure is to really leave alone the top 3 to 4 inches of the plant alone. Absolutely do not take off any of the suckers here, because that could potentially be the fruit itself, or you could by mistake take off the main branch. So you could by mistake take off the main branch, and that could be a big problem. So what we try to target is really, you look at the first bud, the first flower bud, which you see here, and anything below that is open for clipping and for pruning. Nothing above that. So none of these are open for pruning. So you really want to start from the bottom and get rid of any of these leaves and any of these suckers that you see. So what we try to do is at least we get rid of 2 to 3 inches of the leaves at the bottom of the plant, and the reason we do that is really to avoid any of the diseased leaves, and to also ensure that there is a lot of good airflow within the plant themselves. If you do leave some of these plants at the bottom, that there is quite a lot of risk with the soil splashing up and the disease is carrying through. So when there is heavy rain, for instance, what you find is a lot of the water that's splashing on the soil can lead to transfer of diseases to the tomato plants themselves. It's a common way how early blight disease carries over to a tomato plant, as well as the septoral leaf spots as well that can come up in the tomato plant. So you want to make sure that any of these leaves within the at least 2 to 3 inches you want to get rid of.